we construct our identity. We curate our experiences based off our perception of who we are. Pictures that we're taking, the videos that we're recording, that's what we're projecting to the world around us. Very, very few people actually put their authentic self online on social media. So we're very careful about what we're projecting because it's very fragile. If people start seeing and knowing and understanding everything about me, maybe they're not going to accept me. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Momentum Podcast, where I will be sharing with you ideas on living purposefully, on living with impact, and also how you can create wealth. I'm your host today, and my name is Moyo Mamora. And today I'd like to talk to us about identity. Now, if you think about what identity means, it's really how you, permit me to use the same word, identify something. It's like, how do I know this thing is associated with this other thing, right? Or from a personal standpoint is, how do I know that you're you? How do I know that I'm me, if that makes any sense? And I like how someone described identity. It's essentially a sense of self, and it's a sense of worth. So those two things actually is what makes up a complete identity of a person, right? So from an individual perspective, from a personal perspective, when you think about your identity, you're thinking about who am I and what's my worth? And that worth is sort of validated in the community that you are a part of. Now, every culture has a system of identity formation, right? If you think about many years before, which would call this the historical system of identity formation, what happens is that every single person comes from a culture, from a family, and in that family, that's where we draw our sense of self-worth and our sense of self. So, for example, if I come from a family where my ancestors and everyone in my family has been a hunter or has been a blacksmith or has been a farmer, my sense of self is that, right? So as I grow up in that family, in fact, as a matter of fact, maybe you hear names like a person who has a last name Smith, right? Usually that's from a culture where that family were all blacksmiths, right? So that's just like one example. So that then becomes my sense of self, is that as I grow up in that family, it's already projected on me that as an individual, this is who I am and this is what I can do. And so that's also a very key part of why this discussion is important, right? Because our identity ultimately informs how we move through the world around us, and it also informs what we believe we are capable of doing. So it puts guardrails around our potential and our capabilities in life. Now, the other aspect of this identity formation that I talked about was your sense of worth. So going back to that example of a person who came from a family of blacksmiths, for example, or farmers, for example. So if I'm in that system, I'm growing up, my name is, associated with what we do. That then becomes how I start constructing my life and my sense of self. And then finally, that's how I validate who I am, right? Because the extent to which I feel validated then becomes the extent to which I'm able to do what it is that I'm supposed to do as a part of this family tree that I'm a part of, right? So my value then becomes my community members validating the fact that I'm a very good farmer, or I'm a good warrior, or I'm a good blacksmith, whatever that association is. Now, that has its merits, but it also has its flaws, right? Because it limits potential, right? There isn't any I shouldn't say there isn't any self-expression, right? But it limits, you don't have, it puts very tight guardrails around who you can be and what it is that you say you want to do, or what it is that you say you aspire to be in life. So it limits your aspirations. I think that's ultimately what I'm going for. But then you fast forward to the world today, where we have a modern system of identity formation. And of course, in the world today, I need not explain to you that the world today is highly individualistic. We really elevate the ideas of self-actualization and your truth. This is who I am. This is what I can do. This is who you should be. Self-aspiration, all of those types of things are things that we really value in our culture today. And that then influences how we form our identity, or how identity is shaped. And what's important here is that what a lot of people don't know and really pay attention to is that identity formation oftentimes is imposed on us by culture, right? So no matter what we think we're the ones who are sort of constructing this identity, but it's almost like a fish in water, right? Like, you really don't know what's happening. You think these are all your ideas, but the truth is that these ideas are really being pushed on you. So what then happens in this modern system of identity formation is my sense of self-worth. Remember those two prongs: self-worth, a sense of self, and a sense of worth. Those two things then come from me as an individual. I look inward, and I then begin to say to myself, like, you know what? These are the values that I choose. These are the things that I think are important to me. This is what I want to do. This is how I want to self-actualize. This is who I think I need to be. And so what we then start doing is we start constructing our sense of self. And then we start going around to find what community of people are out there that would validate my sense of self. Now, there is a system that is in between all of that, right? And there was some point in time in history where what people did is they picked these values, but what happens is, rather than you being the one to self-validate here, the community out there, would validate, right? So there are norms and customs in your community, and in those, communities, what happens is you could look out there and you can say, these are like the 5-6 things that I think I value, and they're generally accepted, right? And then within that, you start operating, right? But then you have a complete shift on the other side where your sense of worth, your sense of self, all of that is self-constructed. That has its merits, but it also has its problems as well. One of the speakers that I like, that there's a gentleman, he's a theologian, he's a preacher, his name is Tim Keller, and he actually pointed out this, if you'll watch a lot of Disney movies today, right, a lot of it is really built around this whole idea of someone self-actualizing, someone who's breaking out of the mold, right? And then doing something that they think is important to them, doing something that they think is meaningful to them, right? And that's true, right? So you can think about 5, Disney movies or Disney cartoons, and you're going to see this theme that's playing out here, where it's all about what I want to do, what I think is important, and what I value. Now, if you think through this system of identity formation that I was talking about, right? This modern system of identity formation. A simple test case as well is, think about social media, right? Because we spend a lot of our time on social media now. We find community online and so on and so forth. And think about that. In this system, we construct our identity, right? So we curate our experiences based off our perception of who we are. And that's what we're projecting to the world around us. So the pictures that we're taking, the videos that we're recording, the life that we're living, that's what we're putting out there. All right. Very, very few people actually put their authentic self online on social media, right? You see, because in these two systems of identity formation, identity is very fragile. So we're very careful about what we're projecting. We're very careful about what we're putting out there because it's very fragile. Like there's probably some level of insecurity there, right? Because I don't want people to know everything about me, because if people start seeing and knowing and understanding everything about me, I wonder what they're going to think about me. Maybe they're not going to accept me, which then brings us to the other aspect of identity formation, right? So we now start trying to figure out worth based off of engagement on our social media posts, right? So it's like, say, for example, I do something maybe related to fashion, right? And I put it out on social media. I'm like, how many of my friends actually like my post? How many of them comment on this, share it, or save it? And if in this system of identity formation, if I have a very fragile sense of self, or I'm still like trying to figure out myself, I might make a judgment call that, you know what, maybe I'm actually not good at this. But what I'm forgetting is that there is an algorithm behind all of this that is actually choosing what to put out there. And it has nothing to do about whether I'm good or whether I have potential in this space or not. But what happens is, in this world today, we start constructing our identities and we're looking for feedback from the community to judge our sense of self-worth based off of what type of engagement or validation we get. So, but by the way, that also points out the deception in this modern system of identity formation, right? Because I'm not really the one who is quote unquote constructing self. It's not really my sense of self-worth and my sense of self, right? It's what I think is important, and I'm putting it out there, and I'm looking for a community of people that are out there to validate what I think, about myself and what I think I'm worth, right? So it's kind of untrue to really project that and say, this is who I am and this is what I'm doing. Not really. I'm looking for people out there who would support my perception of self. And so these two systems of identity formation have a lot of problems, right? Because it's very fragile, right? So the first one is very limiting. It puts guardrails around potential. It limits every sort of sense of purpose or well, I shouldn't say every, but it can limit the potential that's on the inside of you, because it's really fixated on the structure of my family unit or the societal unit that I'm a part of. And in this modern construct of identity formation as well, it also has its problems, right? Because it's very fragile, right? How I feel is very incoherent, right? So I might feel one way in the morning, and in the evening I feel very differently. So if I've constructed my sense of self and sense of worth based off of feedback that I got from my community, or how I thought, people received me one aspect of my life, and then something changes, and maybe I feel differently about it in 2 weeks or in 2 years or in 3 years or in 5 years, then if everything I've built is around that sense of self and sense of worth, then it threatens my identity, and it sends me into a downward spiral of an identity crisis, which I think that's what we're seeing in society today. In this generation, it's such that people have constructed their sense of self and projected this out there, and they've received validation from different community groups and different things that are, I'll call them props, that are out there. So maybe people have said, it's my job, it's how much money that I can make, or it's this community of friends that I have, or name it. It could be anything that is out there. But the point is if I've constructed myself, my worth around these different things, if any one of those pillars shake, then it really threatens my personal identity, and then I have a crisis. Is that I lose myself. I lose my sense of worth. It's threatened. And of course, identity is very intimate. It's very personal. And I think that's one of the reasons why we see people snapping back in very vicious, aggressive ways, right? Because, what a lot of people have built is putting pressure on them. So if it's being threatened, I have to fight viciously against that, right? For me, personally, I do subscribe to a Judeo-Christian worldview. And when I think about identity, I have, and by the way, this I would say is an alternate view of identity formation, is I think about identity differently, right? Because of the story that I read in the very first page of the Bible, right? Where it says that I, as a human being, I am created in the image and likeness of a God who created the world, a transcendent being, but yet present within creation itself. And that has implications for me, right? Because if we think about how we're defining God here, it's a transcendent being. He is one who is eternal. He is one who is consistent, has very high ethical and moral standards, is very creative, is all powerful, is all knowing. And we can keep going on with these descriptions. And that has implications for me, because if I'm created in the image and likeness of this being, of this deity, then what does that say about my identity, right? What does that say about my sense of self and my sense of worth? And that's something that I've reflected on. Now, of course, people could say, what God are we talking about? And I'm happy to go into a discourse around God and what God we're talking about based on what it is that I'm sharing in a different podcast, right? But just wanted to pause there and just reflect on this idea and say, what does that mean for me? To be created in the image and likeness of this God who created the entire universe. One implication is it says something about my potential. It says something about my purpose. It says something about the meaning of my life. It says something about the value that I hold, right? Because if my value is rooted in the Creator, then it means my sense of self-worth can't be based off of anything, or shouldn't be built on anything that is around me. My sense of self should be aspirational to be like this God, to truly express myself like this God, right? So whether that's in creativity, whether that's in knowledge, whether that's in my social interactions, whether that's in how I live my life, my ethics, my morals, and so on and so forth, it really does have real implications, because I can start thinking about these things and I can start thinking about what it means for myself and how I live my life. And if you read that story in the book of Genesis in the Bible, there are a few things that story tells us. The first thing it tells us is that this is a God who is ordering chaos, right? So he sees chaos and he does not recoil at the chaos, but then he enters into that chaos and then begins to put in place order. In chapter 2, he's described as a gardener as well, right? He's described as someone who is planting trees and, he's beautifying the garden. He has put some precious stones in there. There are rivers that are flowing and so on and so forth. So it tells me that this is a God that values art and values beauty. He values order. He values peace. And then I start thinking about what that means for me. I can shape chaos as well. I should not recoil when I see a problem, right? Anyways, I'm getting into a conversation around potential, right? Which is not what I wanted to do right now. But what I was simply doing is reflecting on that sense of self and that sense of worth, because it then is very different, right? I'm not then threatened by how the world around me changes. I'm not then threatened by how people think about me. Of course, look, we're very social creatures as human beings. So the truth is, as we move through the world, how I interact with people is important. There's no doubt about that. But I can always go back and ground myself in this idea that, okay, if a person speaks to me rudely, or if a person treats me one way or the other, I don't have to mope. I don't have to be stuck about what they said about me or how they thought about me, because God thinks about me very differently. I'm created in the image and likeness of this God. If I don't have to limit what I can do or what I want to do, because God is the creator of everything. He is the God of all potential. So therefore, I shouldn't put limits on myself. I can't let the world or my community or the society that I'm a part of put limits on me. So this is a very, very different system. It's one that has a lot of security in it. It's one that I can really just rest in. And it's one that I can go back to and really ground myself in. Now, I can keep talking and talking about this, for much longer, but I'd like to pause there and just give you something to think about. Is as you go through life, as you go through the world today, really take a step back and say to yourself that, how do I, what's the sense of self that I'm projecting? How have I constructed my own identity? And I'd really encourage you to think through all of this and try to find that comfort in the fact that you have been created in the image and likeness of God. Your value, your worth, your sense of self, your ability isn't based off of what you tell yourself, because many of those things could be lies. But it's also not based off of or limited by what the world around you says to you. But there is a voice on the inside of you, which is the voice of God, that speaks to your potential, that speaks to your ability, but that also says, I love you, that you're worth something to me. And that's something that I think is powerful as we go through life and go through the ups and downs in life. Anyways, this has been fun. Looking forward to seeing you again next time.